The palace of Tixeria Prime stood like a crystal mountain at the edge of a world that had forgotten the sun. Its halls shimmered with floating lights, its walls alive with the hum of thought, but inside the highest chamber, behind layers of psychic shielding and tradition, sat a girl who had never seen light or heard a single voice in her mind. Princess Sarava was blind, not just in the way her people understood sight, but in a far deeper, more feared way. She could not connect, she could not read thoughts, and she could not project them. She was the daughter of the High Queen, the firstborn of the ruling line, yet even her own mother barely looked at her anymore. The Tixarians were a telepathic species, evolved to live without sound or spoken word, their world shaped by silent communication and shared emotion. To be born silent, like Sarava, was a rare defect that many believed was a curse. She lived alone in a chamber called the Glass Throne, not because she ruled anything, but because she was seen through, a fragile thing no one dared to touch. Her world was texture, temperature, and the faint rhythm of her own breath. Servants entered and left without a word, careful not to disturb the one they pitied. She had once tried to mimic mind speech with sound, but her attempts were laughed at in private court. Ugly noise, they had called it. So she stopped trying, and for years, no one had spoken to her at all. But change had come, swift and unexpected. When the interstellar accord announced a new diplomatic opening, Earth had been invited to send a human to Tixeria. A single human among billions of minds, a species that relied on voices, expressions, and strange, uncontrolled emotions. Most of the court whispered warnings. Humans were unpredictable, too wild, too noisy. The High Queen agreed to a controlled visit, more ceremony than welcome. So they sent him, Commander Elias Wren, a human diplomat and explorer who had studied hundreds of alien languages and customs, but who now stood in the Tixarian throne room with open eyes and a heartbeat they could all hear. The moment he arrived, everything shifted. Tixarians recoiled from his presence, disturbed by the flood of uncontrolled feeling he brought into every space. He smiled too easily. He looked people in the eye, and he spoke. But in the silence of her chamber, Sarava heard about him through whispers that slid beneath her door, carried by servants who thought she could not understand. A being who lived in sound and emotion? A creature of voice who wasn't afraid of the silent? Something stirred in her that she hadn't felt in years. Curiosity, sharp and dangerous. Against her advisor's warnings, Sarava requested a meeting with the human. The court was shocked. The High Queen hesitated, then allowed it, if only to quiet the rumors. Elias arrived at the glass throne with 2 guards and a translator device he refused to use. He wanted to speak as himself, not filtered. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried no psychic presence at all, something Sarava found oddly comforting. When he stepped into her chamber, he did not bow or freeze. He simply said, gently, "Hello, princess." And she, uncertain, repeated the word back, "Hello." It was the first spoken exchange in that room in over a decade. Elias did not flinch at her pale, unseeing eyes. Instead, he smiled not with arrogance, but with something else she could not name. Over the next few minutes, he described things she had never experienced, the way earth rain felt on skin, the sound of waves, the warmth of firelight on one's face. She could not see him, nor sense his mind, but his words painted pictures no Tixarian ever had. It was strange and beautiful, and when he left, she realized the silence that followed him was heavier than usual. In the days that followed, Sarava asked for him again, and again. Each visit was different. Sometimes he brought music from his world and played it softly, letting her feel the rhythm through the air. Sometimes he told her about space battles and exploration missions, about how fragile humans were, and yet how they never stopped reaching for the stars. Sarava, once a ghost in her own palace, began to speak more, not just to him but aloud, practicing words, tasting them. Her servants watched from corners, confused and unsure. Whispers returned to the court. Some called it a miracle, others a threat. "She's changing," they said, "and it's the human's fault." The psychic advisors grew tense, especially one named Velker, who had long eyed the throne for himself. He warned the queen that the human's influence was dangerous, that Sarava was unstable and must be restrained. But the queen said nothing. Perhaps even she feared what the silence might become once it began to speak. And so, as the palace trembled beneath ancient laws and new emotions, the blind princess waited for the human's next visit, not just with hope, but with something stronger. For the first time in her life, Sarava was not afraid of the silence. She was afraid it might end. Every morning felt different now in the glass throne. The crystal walls still shimmered with cold light, the air still hummed with the quiet presence of palace watchers, and the same soundless routine filled her hours, but Sarava's world had begun to shift. It was not the kind of change her people could sense through the mind stream, nor one that could be measured by court record. It was something softer, invisible, something only she could feel deep within the silence that had once imprisoned her. She waited now, not in fear, but in anticipation for the sound of footsteps that moved like no Tixarians did. Elias walked without psychic presence, yet his arrival filled the room more than any thought voice ever had. When he entered again that week, he brought no grand gift or formal speech. Instead, he placed a small object in her hand, a rounded metal box, and said, "This is a music player. I thought you might want to choose the song today." She did not understand the device at first, but with his patient voice guiding her fingers, she learned to press the button that made the strange earth sounds rise. One melody flowed like water, another like wind through a canyon. She couldn't see, but she imagined colors in the vibrations. Elias explained each piece with stories from his world of oceans, forests, cities full of lights. "And this one," he said, as a soft piano melody played, "was written by someone who couldn't see either, but his music spoke louder than most words ever could." Sarava sat in silence, not because she had nothing to say, but because she was learning to listen. No Tixarian had ever taught her that. The days blurred into a strange rhythm. With each visit, Elias brought her more than just words. He brought the human way of feeling. He described laughter, grief, anger, not as abstract mental energies, but as real, messy, powerful things. Sarava didn't know what to do with such emotions at first. Her people had always suppressed their feelings beneath layers of order and psychic unity, believing raw emotion was primitive. But the more Elias spoke, the more she realized how empty that belief felt. In her silence, she had always known pain, but never had a way to name it. Now, she could speak it aloud, in a language that wasn't perfect, but was hers. When Elias told her about Earth's poets and how they captured meaning in flawed, fragile words, she asked if he thought words could lie. He smiled and said, "They can, but they can also free you." That night, she repeated that line to herself until she fell asleep. But beyond the quiet chamber, unrest brewed. The court was not blind to what was happening. They saw the shift in Sarava's behavior, the way her posture changed, how she now asked for books, for sound recordings, for things Tixarians had long dismissed. The psychic elite whispered that the human was corrupting her. Velker, the queen's senior advisor, grew more vocal, claiming that Sarava's awakening was a sign of instability. He proposed a solution, an old bonding rite, where Sarava would be psychically linked to a noble mate chosen by the council. The bond would suppress her individual thoughts, allowing her to function within the mind stream as part of a pair. It was presented as protection. In truth, it was a cage. The queen, caught between duty and doubt, delayed her answer, but Sarava felt the pressure like a storm cloud behind her. She said nothing to Elias about it, not yet. She didn't want to ruin the fragile wonder between them. One evening, as a cool wind passed through the high vents of the palace, Elias brought something different, a simple wooden object. A carved model of a tree. He placed it in her hands and told her it was made by a blind sculptor from his home city. "He used his fingers to see," Elias said, "just like you." She ran her hands over the smooth lines, and a strange emotion welled up inside her too big for her to name. She asked Elias why humans helped those who were different, when it was easier to leave them behind. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Because we don't believe being broken means being worthless. Sometimes the broken ones change the world." Sarava didn't speak after that. She just held the tree close, feeling the shape of a world she had never seen, yet had somehow always longed for. That night, when she lay alone in her glass room, she wondered what it meant to belong. Not as a princess, not as a symbol of pity, but as a person. She imagined a world where voices mattered, where feelings weren't weaknesses, and where silence could be filled with music instead of fear. Somewhere deep inside her, the first sparks of rebellion began to glow, not the angry, violent kind, but the quiet, unshakable kind that starts with a single word whispered in the dark. She wasn't ready to fight yet, but for the first time, she knew she would not go back to being invisible. Elias had not only touched her hand, he had touched something far deeper. And as the night stretched on, the Princess of Silence whispered to herself, in a voice still finding its strength, "I am not afraid." The palace had never known real rain. Texaria was a dry world, where the skies were silver and the winds carried crystal dust instead of water. Yet one night, Sarava dreamed of it. She dreamed of cool droplets falling from a sky she could not see, striking her skin like soft voices. In the dream, she stood in an open field with no walls, no guards, no eyes watching her, only the sound of falling rain and a warm presence beside her. She didn't know if it was Elias, but she felt no fear. When she woke, her hand was curled tightly around the wooden tree he had given her, as if it had rooted itself in her sleep. The dream stayed with her, echoing like a melody she didn't understand. The next time Elias visited, she asked him what rain truly felt like, not just the science of it, but the emotion. He smiled, and instead of explaining, he took a soft cloth, dipped it into cool water, and placed it gently against her hand. She flinched at first, then held it closer, as he whispered, "Now imagine that all over your face, your hair, your skin, like the sky is washing the world." Her breath caught in her throat. "It's alive," she said quietly. "Yes," Elias replied, "and so are you." Their bond grew stronger with every visit, but so did the danger. Rumors had turned into political whispers. The council now believed Elias was manipulating Sarava to weaken the royal line, to stir chaos among the people. Velker, the queen's trusted advisor, had become especially vocal. He warned that the princess was becoming unstable, that her sudden love for sound and human ways was a threat to tradition. Behind closed doors, he pushed harder for the psychic bonding ritual to be completed, an ancient rite that would tether Sarava to a stable Texarian mate and suppress the strange emotions awakening in her. The queen, torn between the fear of rebellion and the love of her child, had not yet agreed. But the pressure was building. Elias noticed the guards watching more closely now, standing closer to Sarava than before. He said nothing, but he knew something was coming. That afternoon, Sarava asked Elias to walk with her, really walk, not just in the courtyard, but beyond the inner walls. It was dangerous, unapproved, but Elias nodded. They left quietly through a servant's passage, her hand on his arm, her steps steady despite the palace's alarms silently flaring behind them. They traveled through narrow paths and quiet roads, moving beyond the dome of the capital city. The landscape beyond was dry and cracked, yet open, free. Elias guided her to an ancient observatory, long forgotten by the Tyxarian elite. It was dusty, broken in parts, but the roof opened to the stars. Inside, he helped her touch the old star map with raised surfaces and planetary lines etched in stone. As her fingers traced the ridges, Elias told her about constellations, how humans connected stars into pictures to tell stories. He spoke of explorers who named distant worlds not with numbers, but with dreams. She felt the shapes of those dreams under her fingertips and wept quietly, not from sadness, but from the beauty of something no one had ever shared with her before. As night fell, they lay on the cool floor, side by side, facing a sky she could not see, but could feel through his voice. Elias asked her, "Do you want to rule this world, Sarava?" She hesitated. "I don't know if I want to rule it," she whispered. "But I want to live in it, and not in silence." Elias nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time you decide who you really are, not the court's daughter, not the silent one, but you." She didn't answer, but her hand found his, and she held it tighter than she ever had before. Back in the palace, chaos was growing. The advisors discovered her absence, and Velker used it as proof of her instability. He demanded an immediate bonding to a high-ranking psychic officer, claiming it was the only way to protect both her and the Empire. The queen, torn and weary, agreed to announce the ritual in 2 days. Sarava and Elias returned just before sunrise, unaware of the decision that had been made in their absence. She sensed the change in the air, the stiffness of her attendants, the way her mother avoided her eyes. When she was told of the bonding order, she stood still for a long time, the silence in the chamber deepening like a crack in glass. She didn't scream, didn't argue. She only said in a calm voice, "I understand." But inside, something had broken loose. Not in fear, but in defiance. She had seen a wider sky, felt a dream of rain, and touched the stars. She would not be caged again. That night, Sarava returned to the music player Elias had given her and chose a song without asking for help. The melody rose into the air soft, strong, filled with longing. As it played, she whispered to herself, "Even if they bind me, they cannot bind my voice." Outside her chamber, Elias stood with his fists clenched, knowing that time was running out and that the next move they made would change everything. The 2 days passed like a slow storm, quiet on the surface, but full of rising pressure. The announcement of the bonding ceremony spread through the palace like cold wind official, final, unstoppable. Everyone understood what it meant. Princess Sarava, the silent one, would be tied to a noble-born mind-talker, a pairing that would erase her independence and fold her into the collective, where her strange voice and foreign thoughts could be softened into silence. The court believed it was mercy. Sarava knew it was exile in a different form. Since her return from the observatory, she had spoken less, but listened more. She noticed every hesitation, every glance, every whisper behind closed doors. Even her mother had begun avoiding her completely, letting the council speak in her place. But Sarava was no longer the fragile girl sitting alone in a glass room. She had touched rain, not with her skin, but with her spirit. She had held a piece of the stars in her hands and listened to a voice that did not fear her. That voice was Elias, and though he stood quietly beside her now, the strength he had given her was louder than ever. On the night before the ceremony, Sarava made her choice. She waited until the guards had changed shift, then left her chamber through the hidden passage Elias had shown her once before. He was waiting, just as they had planned, not in armor or with weapons, but with a single bag and steady eyes. "Are you ready?" he asked. She nodded. No more hesitation. The palace behind them had raised walls of light, psychic barriers meant to keep minds from escaping, but she had no mind stream to block, and Elias carried none. Together, they slipped past the censors, moving like ghosts toward the outer edge of the capital. Their goal was clear: the human diplomatic shuttle, still docked at the edge of Tixaria's orbit, waiting for orders. If they could reach it, Sarava could leave this world behind not in shame, but in choice. But Velker had predicted something like this. The man had watched her too long, feared her voice too deeply. As they reached the final checkpoint, a high platform that overlooked the valley lights flared above them. Hover drones descended, guards appeared, and Velker himself stepped forward. "You were always a threat," he said coldly. "You were never meant to rule. You don't even belong to us." Sarava stood still, not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to hear it every cruel word that proved what she'd always known. Elias stepped in front of her, but she placed a hand on his arm and gently moved beside him. And then, for the first time before witnesses, Sarava spoke not in mind thought, but in a clear, steady voice that echoed across the platform. "I am not your shame," she said. "I am not your weakness. I am Tixarian, and I have a voice." The silence that followed was sharp, like broken glass. Even the guards seemed unsure. No one had ever heard her speak like that before. No one had believed she could. Velker, red with anger, raised a hand and gave the order to seize them. But just then, a roar broke through the sky, a sound no Tixarian had ever heard. The human shuttle, responding to a distress code Elias had sent earlier, descended like a falling star, engines lighting up the night with fire. The sudden shockwave sent guards stumbling, and in the confusion, Elias grabbed Sarava's hand and ran. They moved fast, hearts racing, as heat and wind swirled around them. The shuttle's ramp opened. A voice shouted from inside, "Now or never." They reached it just as Velker's psychic strike flew across the air, but it hit only the metal hull. Elias pulled Sarava into the ship, and the ramp closed behind them with a hiss. As the shuttle lifted into the stars, Sarava turned one last time, facing the world that had once called her broken. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She whispered, "I forgive you." And then the clouds swallowed Tixaria behind her. Inside the ship, Elias guided her to a seat and held her hand tightly. "You did it," he said quietly. Sarava nodded, her breathing slow, steady. "No," she answered, "we did it." Outside the window, space unfolded like a sea of endless night, and for the first time in her life, Sarava felt not lost, but free. She had escaped not just the palace, but the silence that had caged her heart. And as the stars passed above and around them, she remembered the dream of rain and wondered if, somewhere out there, she might finally feel it for real. The stars passed slowly at first, like they were watching her. Sarava sat near the shuttle's window, listening to the hum of human engines and the soft breath of Elias beside her. Space was vast and quiet. Here, silence didn't trap her. It gave her room to think, to feel, to simply exist. Earth was still far away, a small dot in a sea of black, but the closer they drew to it, the more her mind began to open, not with psychic force, but with curiosity. For the first time, she asked questions not out of fear, but wonder. What did the wind sound like in a human city? Did the trees really dance in the breeze the way Elias said? And the rain, was it soft or strong? Did it come without warning or gently announce itself on rooftops and skin? She imagined stepping into it not as a princess, not as a prisoner, but as herself. Blind, scarred, full of feelings she was still learning to name, yet stronger than anyone had ever believed. In those quiet hours between galaxies, she held Elias's hand often, not because she was afraid, but because it reminded her she wasn't alone anymore. When they reached Earth's orbit, Sarava felt a sudden ache in her chest. Not fear, something else. A tension, a pressure, like holding her breath for too long. The shuttle's descent through the atmosphere was rough, noisy, alive. She clung to her seat and felt the heat around the ship as they broke through the clouds. And then, just as Elias promised, it happened. The sound of rain. At first, it was faint, like soft fingers tapping the roof. Then stronger, until the shuttle was surrounded by it. Sarava stood slowly as the ramp opened and a gust of cool, damp air rushed inside. She stepped forward without hesitation, feeling the shift in temperature, the smell of soil, the pulse of a living world. Elias didn't say a word. He simply led her outside, where the rain fell freely, without judgment, without command. The drops touched her skin like 1,000 tiny voices. She turned her face upward and let it wash over her. The cold didn't bother her. The wind didn't scare her. For the first time, the darkness behind her eyes felt like a canvas instead of a cage. She opened her hands, palms toward the sky, and laughed quietly at first, then freely. A real laugh. Not taught, not practiced. Just hers. Elias watched her from nearby, his expression soft, a little awed. "You look different," he said. She tilted her head toward him. "I feel real," she replied. And she meant it. No longer a symbol for pity, no longer the broken one, no longer just the princess locked away in a glass room. Now she was a woman of two worlds, born from silence, awakened by a voice, and remade in rain. As days passed, Earth welcomed her, not with ceremony, but with kindness. She stayed at a quiet institute for interspecies learning, where no one knew her name or feared her title. People there spoke plainly, asked honest questions, laughed when something was funny, and cried when something hurt. No masks. No mind streams. Just life. Sarava began learning to read through touch, listen to music without needing a guide, and even speak her own thoughts with new courage. Some students were curious about her, some kept their distance, but none tried to fix her. That was new. And beautiful. One night, as they walked along a garden path after another soft rain, Elias asked her, "Do you miss home?" Sarava stopped. She thought for a long time. Then she said, "I miss what it could have been." Elias nodded. "That's fair." She turned toward him and added, "But I don't want to go back to change it." I want to build something new from this. She pointed to her chest, where her voice now lived unburied. From me. And he smiled, not the smile of a rescuer, not of a man who had saved her, but of a friend who had walked beside her until she could stand on her own. That night, as she lay beneath a skylight open to the real stars, with the scent of rain still in the air, Sarava whispered a promise into the dark. No more silence, she said. Only truth. Only light. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They lived now in her. And as the stars shone above and the rain clouds passed gently across the sky, the girl who had once been afraid of everyone finally found peace in the place where her heart had been touched, not by power, but by kindness. And she never returned to the glass throne,